and I'm so pleased to introduce Dr. Lauren Granite. Dr. Lauren Granite is the U.S. Education Director for Centropa, a historical institute based in Vienna. She has a PhD from Drew University and master's degree from the University of Chicago. Before joining Centropa in 2010, she spent more than a dozen years teaching Jewish history to adults, college students, and teens. She builds Centropa's network of Jewish, public, parochial, and charter schools in North America and designs workshops, seminars, webinars, and Centropa's annual Summer Academy, where 70 educators from 17 countries come together to study history in the great cities of Central Europe. Dr. Granite also mentors teachers, designs online and in-person activities, and establishes teacher advisory teams for Centropa programs. Her latest project is creating a network of museum educators in the US and Europe to discover ways that Centropa can support their work with museum visitors, particularly visiting school classes. I'm so pleased that Lauren is here tonight to do this workshop with her. And at this point, I'm going to mute myself and turn over the program to Dr. Granite.
Thank you. Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Elise. And thank you to both your organizations for inviting Centropa to be part of this class every year for the past few years. So I'm delighted to see everyone here. I was a high school teacher. I taught Jewish history at a private Jewish school, and my job is to basically take Centropa's resources, which I'm going to tell you about, and help you use them in our classes. We have primary sources, photographs, and interviews, as well as secondary sources. So my mandate for this evening was to really focus on pre-war Jewish life, and in many ways that is Centropa's expertise. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Centropa, and I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Always a little bit of a dicey proposition going back and forth because I also have a PowerPoint. Okay, I assume you can see my screen now. Thank you, Shauna, for giving me the thumbs up. I never fully know what's happening. So Centropa is, as Shauna said, a historical institute based in Vienna, Austria. We interviewed over 1,200 elderly Jews in 15 Central and Eastern European countries between 2000 and 2009. And what makes our resources slightly different than some of the other resources that you may have been exposed to, maybe from the Shoah Foundation or the Holocaust Museum, is we did not use videotape in our interviews. And we didn't focus on the Holocaust. We said to our interviewees, please tell us your entire life story as you show us your old family photographs. And we digitized over 23,000 of these beautiful old family photographs, which means we have a digital record of Jewish life in 15 Central and Eastern European countries from the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire through the first decade of the 21st century. No one has a record like that. No one has a digital visual record of Jewish life like that. And the beauty, of course, is when you're teaching 21st century students, first of all, everything's digitized. It's already on the web. Which means for us, it means we can do a lot of creative things in terms of creating traveling exhibitions or PDFs or source books or websites with our resources. But more importantly, for the purposes of classroom teachers, all of your students, probably, I don't know how young your students go, but most likely all of your students have a telephone that have photos like the photos we have in our database, and there's something they can really relate to. I'm going to just take a very quick time, a few minutes, to show you our new and improved website. And we're going to actually start offering pretty short webinars, 20-30-minute webinars, to give people tours and show you the different search features that we have. I won't do that tonight, because what I want to do tonight is share with you a few things. I want to share with you very specific excerpts from our archives of interviews about what Jewish life was like. And my main thesis will be to really show the diversity of Jewish life so that you can bring that to your students. I am fully aware that public school students, I assume most of you teach in public schools, that public school students or teachers don't have time to spend a lot of time on pre-war Jewish life. But we really firmly believe that you just can't teach how Jews were murdered. You have to teach how they lived as well if you really want to help your students understand the impact. And there are many other reasons to do that as well. And so I want to offer you not just some conceptual understanding of the Jewish world pre-war, but I also want to give you some concrete resources that you can use to bring into your class that will not take weeks and weeks for you to share with them, that you can do in one class or a half a class or whatever. I also have a Google Classroom that has several pre-made activities that you can just download all the resources, the worksheets, the teacher packet and everything and use in your class. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do today in, I don't know, what is it, an hour and 20 minutes. Let's see, I didn't really discuss this, Shauna, but maybe you can field questions. Would that be okay? So feel free to interrupt me if someone has a question. If you could keep your eye on the chat, because I know from experience, I can't do that and talk at the same time.
I've got it. If you have a question, you can put it right in the chat and I'll be the one to interrupt.
Thank you. Okay. Sure. So we have this amazing database and this website. I want to just show you a couple of things. And again, I do my best to think like a high school teacher, or I taught high school, so I tend to think like a high school teacher. I know some of you teach elementary school or middle school. Our resources tend to work best for middle and high school teachers, although I think our photograph database would be really very useful resource for teachers of elementary school, maybe fourth and fifth graders. The first thing I want to show you that's a little different from our prior website was that we do have these country-based websites, so web pages, so that if you wanted to divide your students, do a project, you want to divide your students up into different groups and each do a different country, you could have them, well, can go to Ukraine, it's in the news, so you could have them each, if they could just go to one of these websites, and then you can see they would have direct access to the photos, the biographies that we have here from Ukraine, as well as the films. There should be, our film should be here as well. I don't know why they're not listed. Oh, here's under education. So these are the films and the lesson plans that we would have, all related to Ukraine. So if I clicked on the Poland page, it would do the same thing with Poland. So that's just one quick thing for if you're thinking about how can you use this resource. I wanted to show you that that feature. But if we go to the photo documents, we go to the archive, I want to just quickly show you the photos, and I'm going to pick Poland tonight, mostly because if you're teaching about the Holocaust, you're likely going to teach about Poland at some point, right? And so if you go by country and you click the country, you could even narrow it down this way. I'm not going to take the time to do that. You see you have 1,287 photographs and documents that we digitized from our interviews in Poland. And as you can see, there are letters, there are going to be passport and official documents, maybe wedding contracts. And you can see, there are photos just like your students have in their cameras. They're going to be portrait photos, but they're also going to be what we would call selfies or group photos, photos with friends, photos on vacation, photos in school, et cetera, et cetera. And our search features are really everything's tagged, which took a lot of time. So if you wanted to really be specific about what kinds of photos you're looking for, you would go over here and click on some of these different topics, and you could just, if you clicked here, you would get all the studio portraits of individuals. If I clicked on this one, et cetera, et cetera. I want to show you though that I'm just going to pick this one randomly. I don't know this interview or anything, just to show you. This is this photo. This is this photo page. So you can create a QR code for it. You can print it. You can share it with an email. And under each photo, we have a description of that photo. And under that description, we have all of the rest of the photos from that interview. And I'm going to show you later on some activities you can do with these photographs. And then the details of the photo are here, information about maybe people in the photograph, and then this would take you to the biography. So again, I'm going very quickly. There's more I could show you, but I'm going to go very quickly. The biography, we call them biographies because we took out the questions and we put them in the interviews in chronological order, the stories in chronological order, because our interviewers went back multiple times And we didn't use videotape because we wanted to have the opportunity, like if the interviewer woke up in the middle of the night and said, oh, I wish I had asked this, they could go back and ask them, and then we could fit that into the interview. So every interview page also has the ability to be shared through QR code or printed. The basic information about the person interviewed is here. There's usually a photo here, little blurb about the person as the interviewer met him or her. And these are hyperlinks to different parts of the family story. So if you wanted to divide this up, say you teach 7th grade, and these are long interviews. So you're going to assign 5 or 6 students to one interview for them to delve deep into this particular story or this particular story in relation to what's happening in Poland. And this would take that student to this part of the interview. And you can see we have a what's called glossary. So if students don't know what the German invasion of Poland was, there's going to be a little glossary here that they can read what it was. And this is very useful for references to events or places that, you know, American students might not know, like the Holodomor. Am I getting that right? Yes, I have been having trouble saying this. It's the Stalin's policy of basically starving the Ukrainians in the 1930s, 1920s or 30s. So like that's an example that you would have a glossary of. It would help your students understand. So you certainly are welcome to print out the interview if you want, and all of the photos for this person are over here to the side. And if I were to click here, you would get that same thing. And you can see we collected photos through their entire lives. So this is likely the grandchild of the interviewee or someone like this. And all the person's details are here. And the biography details are here. And then if you wanted more photos or information from Poland, you would always see this to the right. So if this person wasn't from Poland, say they were from the Czech Republic, this would say Czech Republic, and it would highlight Czechia, or it's also called Czechia these days, Czechia, and it would have how many photos we have from Czechia, how many biographies, how many lesson plans, etc. Okay, any questions so far? No? Okay, I'm going to move quickly because I want to get on to the topic at hand, but I want to give you just an overview of what we have to offer teachers, okay? So then what we started doing is started making short multimedia films using the photographs we digitized. So we have 2 types of films. One we call documentaries. They're overviews of a period of history or a particular event. And then we have personal story films where we took some of our most compelling stories and made short multimedia films out of them. The shortest one is 3 minutes. The longest one is 30 minutes. So they're perfect for classroom use. I'm probably going to show you one of the ones from Poland or maybe this guy. It just depends how much time we have. But you can see we have them in different languages. So this means audio and this means subtitles. So if you click on this, you'll get the version with the audio that's in Hungarian and the English subtitles. If you click this one, you'll get the audio in Hungarian and the German subtitles. If you click this, you'll get the Czech version with audio and the English subtitles. And every film has its own page. This guy lived in Munkacs, which is why, it was in 5 different countries over 70 years. So like, it's a very multicultural place. But every film, you can stream it straight from here, but you can download them here. And if you were to download it, you really need to click what subtitles you want, and that's the file that will download. A little summary of the film. This tells you how long it is. This tells you the countries. This takes you straight to the interview information, the photo information for this interviewee. We have study guides, which are links to online short articles about related topics. So Munkacs is the city he lived in. It's that city that kept being in different countries over the course of 70 years. But so you wouldn't have this for some other film that takes place in Austria. You would have different study guide topics here. And these will be online sources. And then underneath that, you would have Centropa lessons that Centropa teachers made that use that film. Okay, and we collect lessons from our teachers. We don't have a boxed curriculum. We work with teachers throughout Europe, mostly Central and Eastern Europe, and Israel and the United States, and we collect the best lessons and upload them to our website. and they're all free to download, and you can use any part of them. And teachers use our resources. This is a little bit of a reminder. Teachers use our resources not just to teach the Holocaust, but creative writing, civics, foreign language. We have Spanish teachers, French teachers using our films. We have film making, art. And so we feel like if you're ever interested in interdisciplinary projects, Centropa is a really wonderful resource because we're a storytelling organization. We collected stories. We collected stories from the 20th century, Jewish life in the 20th century. And we feel that stories are universal and stories connect us all. And as I hope you'll see later on, or as we go through the rest of my presentation, you'll see these are stories of, people fighting with their siblings or falling in love or getting through hard times. These are all universal stories, and we don't make the films for students. We tell human stories, and that's why they really resonate with people, especially students, because all of our films, no matter how short, start when the survivor was a child and go to the end of their life, even if it's a 6-minute film or a 7-minute film. Obviously, we don't include every detail, but it stretches, and we're really very committed to helping students see Holocaust survivors as complete human beings, with their entire story, and the Holocaust being part of their lives. Okay, so that's the overview, and if there's nothing else, there's more I could show you on the website. We do have I am going to show you one more thing. You see, we have a page for a lesson plan, so you can search the lesson plan page according to grade level, according to topic, things like that. But I do want to show you the website. So the strength of Centropa is that we don't have a box curriculum. There's not just one way for you to use what we have. We have an open source database for you to delve into so that you can really create the lessons and projects that meet the needs of your students and your curriculum and your standards and what you want to accomplish as an educator. The challenge, of course, of Centropa is that we don't have a box curriculum and we have an open source database. There's a lot there, and we know that teachers have limited time increasingly. I mean, I was a teacher first with Centropa, one of the first teachers that started working with Centropa, and then I started working for Centropa, and it's even changed in the time that I've been working here, the amount of time and financial support that teachers have for professional development. So I'm very, very aware of if I'm to make our resources useful to you, I have to think about helping you bridge that gap between the vast resources we have and what you're going to do with them in the classroom. And one of the things we do towards that end is create websites that cull together resources we have so you don't have to dig. So for example, if you're going to teach about the kinder transport, Shauna, I don't know if you've taught about that yet. You've studied that? Nah, maybe or not. And I don't know.
A little bit.
So it's a pretty common topic, especially working with students, because it's about it's when Great Britain opened their doors to almost 10,000 Jewish children from infancy until about 16, 17, from what was then Greater Germany, which included Germany, Austria, which had been invaded after the Anschluss, and also that part of the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, that had ethnic Germans in it. So we have stories. We have excerpts from our interviews about people's experiences on the kinder transport, and they're already here. My point is, you don't have to read the entire biography to find it. So you have 3 from the Czechoslovakia, 3 from Austria. We have the films that here, you would just get all of the films that we have that mention the kinder transport. We have a special film that we made a couple of years ago, about 22 minutes, where we interviewed 12 survivors of the kinder transport who ended up in England. And the Claims Conference helped fund our stories. So these are just out and out interviews with about their experiences, as well as these other stories. This Lily Tauber film is our longest film. If this is a topic you're gonna teach, I highly recommend it. It's 30 minutes, and it's just a beautifully done film. And much of the film are her letters to her parents who were stuck in Vienna and then deported to Opole, a ghetto in Poland, where they ultimately perished. But it's also their letters to her. They have both sides of the letters, because when her parents went to the ghetto, they left her letters that they had gotten from her when she was in England. She was a teenager. They had left all the letters with her aunt, who was married to a non-Jewish person, and so that's why she wasn't deported. So she had both sides of the letters, and it's just a beautifully told story. So this is just one example of let me see, of these thematic websites. And we also, where you can find the excerpts. The other one we have interviews with Sephardic Jews whose families were originally from Spain, because we interviewed people who lived in the former Yugoslavia, what we call the Balkans today. We have 12 interview excerpts. They're already edited right here for Kristallnacht, which I know we just passed in the anniversary, but in case you're getting to this next semester or something, that might be useful. And introductions to Holocaust in Hungary, which is fascinating story in the Holocaust if you haven't studied that. So this is just something for you to explore. Okay, now I'm going to start actually talking about giving you resources. Let me see. Let me just pick up. I think. Oh, here we go. Yes. All right, I'm going to use this to hopefully keep myself on track. Let's see. We'll just start here. Sorry, I gotta make sure I can see what I'm doing. All right, so navigate to this. So I just want to quickly address, why would you teach about life before the Holocaust? You know, one reason is many of the stories the stories we have are stories of children and teens, because when we interviewed elderly people between 2000 and 2009, those were people who had been children and teens, and students relate to those stories, obviously, because they relate to people their own age. We really think that it helps humanize Jews for those of your students who might not know any Jewish people. And if you're going to be teaching about Nazi propaganda, just teaching that these were people who fought with their siblings and fell in love and played with friends and loved sports, etc., that just humanizes the Jews more. If that's something that needs to happen in your classroom, I don't know for sure. I think in some places it's true, it does. We had a teacher, we had a resource teacher at a museum in Florida, one of our first public school educators to join our network. And he said, you know, your stories, they don't, by not just focusing on the most vulnerable point of the survivors' lives, you really humanize them. And so we sort of took that to heart, that was something from someone who'd really been working with survivors and their stories. And we also think it's important to talk about, what did survivors lose? You know, I think sometimes we hear what survivors lost, but they lost a world. They didn't just lose their siblings or their families, which was horrific enough, but they lost the entire world that they lived in. And that's just gone for the ages. And so that's something that I think is important, that we think is important to share as well. I also feel like we want to show you that there was a real diversity of Jewish life. One of the things I really hope you walk away with today is a sense of the diversity of Jewish life. And there were rich Jews and poor Jews and middle-class Jews. There were rural Jews and urban Jews. There were Jews who were really involved in politics. And there was a great diversity of politics, like the early 20th century in Central and Eastern Europe, as in other places, was full of political movements, and Jews were part of all of these movements. And there were left-wing people and right-wing people, and traditionally religious Jews and assimilated Jews. So I hope that's something I can offer you to walk away with, to share with your students. So having said that, I'm going to talk a little bit about Jewish life pre-war. And this is a map that I think I got from the Holocaust Museum, famous, I think this is from the Gilbert book. And primarily what I want to show you, I'm going to sort of divide Europe into East and West for our purposes. Their total were about 9 million Jews in Europe prior to the war. And the largest populations of Jews were in Poland, in Russia, in Hungary, and in Romania. So we're talking about here, 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 and over here. And by the way, if you're interested, I just did a presentation on Ukraine the other day. Ukraine's like here, right? And Eastern Europe, I'm going to sort of talk in broad brushstrokes, but basically speaking, Eastern European Jews tended to live in smaller towns and villages, although of course there were Jews in big cities such as Odessa. They tended to speak Yiddish. They tended to, which is their own language, which is a combination of German and Hebrew and some Slavic languages all mixed in. They had a rich cultural life. There was Yiddish books and Yiddish theaters and Yiddish newspapers. There were Yiddish movies and films, very famous film stars and actors in Jewish culture. So there was a really rich Jewish life that came specifically out of these Jewish communities. And I haven't even mentioned the religious life, in traditional religious Jewish life, the most esteemed thing a man could do was to be a Talmud scholar. And Jewish life revolved for centuries and centuries around creating possibilities for young men to become a Talmidim Chachamim, very learned men. They set up schools called yeshivas. People would send their sons to yeshivas in other towns. Local people would put up the young men in their town, feed them for Shabbat dinner, etc. And as part of this, the women, when these young men would get married, very often the women were left to earn a living because the men were studying sacred texts all day. The women would be the ones earning a living, speaking the language of the larger society, Poland, Hungarian, whatever it would be, and sometimes selling things in the marketplace, etc. So that tended to be a little bit more what European Jewish life was like. The little towns and villages that Jews lived in were called shtetls. On a second. I forgot I had added this other thing. The little towns I lived in were called shtetls. I should have put it, oh, here you can see it spelled here as shtetls. And mostly Jews in these areas lived separately as a minority. Many of the villages were primarily Jewish, but not exclusively Jewish. They definitely lived around non-Jews as well. And many of the from the late 19th into the earlier 20th century, as Zionism grew, and I don't know how much you know about the origins of Zionism, but Zionism came out of nationalism. Let me take a step back for those of you who are history teachers, modern history teachers. The nationalism of the 19th century came along after the fall of Napoleon, the Napoleonic Empire. All the peoples were like, wait a minute, why should we have these French Enlightenment values imposed on us? We want to have our own values, whether we're Hungarian or German or whatever. And nationalism basically, broad brushstrokes, arose out of this. And the 19th century was a real struggle between conservatives and liberals and nationalism, and how are they going to organize their governments. And one of the things that came out of that for Jews who had lived since the Roman Empire in Europe was, well, where do the Jews fit in? Because the definition of nationalism was you speak the same language, you have the same folk traditions, you have the same culture, you sort of bloodlines. I don't know that that was ever explicit. And Jews didn't have that because Jews had their own language, and Jews were often separate because of the way the society had been organized, and they'd been discriminated against, and they were deliberately kept separate from Christian society. So there was literally something that was referred to as the Jewish question, like how do we incorporate Jews, or where do Jews fit into this view of nationalism if the Hungarians are going to become a nation? And that's why even to this day, it's hard from an American point of view. It's very common for us to say Jewish American, Italian American, or American Jewish. That's a whole nother debate. But in Europe, they didn't really do that. Like you were either Jewish or you were Hungarian. Like sometimes I'm Jewish. Like sometimes my mother say, well, we were Russian. I'm like, yeah, you weren't Russian. Like the Russians wouldn't have thought you were Russian. And that's just not how it worked. You weren't Russian, you weren't German, it just was very different. And so the Jews didn't really fit in. And that became very clear with the Dreyfus affair in France at the end of the 1900s. Sorry, at the end of the 1800s, at the end of the 19th century. and where a captain of the French army was accused of treason and falsely accused of treason, but he was imprisoned. It became a whole big famous event in French in the newspapers. And Theodor Herzl, a Viennese Jewish, originally born in Budapest, but a Viennese journalist, Jewish guy, he said, look, if this can happen in France, where Jews were first emancipated, where they're very assimilated, if they can turn on this French captain in the army who's clearly loyal and set him up like this, Jews aren't safe anywhere. And he basically started Zionism, but there wasn't just one version of Zionism. There was a political Zionism, and there were many versions of political Zionism, and there was cultural Zionism, and there was, I'm forgetting all the other ones. But there were lots of different versions because, you know, people have different perspectives on what it means for Jews to set up their own country. So when I say Jews in Eastern Europe, that was a very quick little bubble of what I'm talking about when I talk about Zionism, because I want to be very clear historically, whatever ideas you have in your head about Zionism today, right? That's after 80 years or however long it's been since 48. The state of Israel existed. We're talking before the state of Israel existed. So what happened is in the late 19th century through the early decades of the 20th century, Zionism grew, particularly in Eastern Europe, and you had youth groups set up to sort of where Jews would learn about going to Palestine, but learning about maybe doing agriculture so that they would eventually move to Palestine and build up the land there. It was then called Palestine. They would be prepared for that, or there would just be youth groups where Jews would get together and they would talk about, you know, political Jewish ideas, and they would go hiking and they would have sports and they would do all these things. So these were basically youth groups, but I wanted to give you some historical context so you understand what the Zionist youth groups were. It was really about identity, and everyone in Europe was trying to figure out their identity, right? There were the communists and the socialists who were trying to overthrow the world order so that the workers were in charge and there was more equality, and there were plenty of Jews who were communists and socialists as well. And there were Jewish versions of these political movements. So this was part of the rich Jewish culture that existed. It wasn't the only part. You had all these other aspects as well. And I guess I also put in here this Ukraine piece, Holodomor, because and the Great Terror, which was when they went after Jews and other intelligentsia in Ukraine, Stalin did in the 20s and 30s. And the Holodomor was the Great Famine, where they literally starved the Ukrainians. Up to 4 million Ukrainian Jews were starved to death. I'm sorry, I think it was 4 million Ukrainians, not Ukrainian Jews. And that was part of the Stalinist policy. I put this in here because the excerpts I'm going to read you, I just wanted to include it. Sometimes you'll hear a lot from our interviews, like there was no problem with our non-Jewish neighbors before, or life was great before the Germans came in. And I just wanted to point out, particularly because Ukraine is in the news and we work with Ukrainian teachers and it's just on our mind over here at Centropa, that, you know, those in certain parts of the world were not doing fine, that had no reasons, that had nothing to do with necessarily being Jewish, or just had to do with where they happened to live. So what I wanted to do is read you a few excerpts from our archives so you could see how what we can offer you and your students. And I think you could create some really great programs with this. So I'm actually going to read some of these excerpts for you because they're really incredible. Okay, this man is Joseph Faludis from Kiskeros, Hungary, and he grew up in an Orthodox community. And this is what he has to tell us about his life before the war. Kiskeros was an Orthodox community. We all had peyot, which are these side locks that we stuck behind our ears. And later when we got into the yeshiva, we wore our peyot out. I was a clever kid. I never did what you'd call homework. What I knew was what they'd explain to us in class. Regular school was something new for us because we learned with entirely different methods and completely different things than in the cheder. When he says regular school, he means Hungarians, like public school, and cheder is religious Jewish school before the yeshiva, which is for the older kids. We had school lessons in the morning, and then we stayed until 6 in the evening with the Melamed, the Jewish teacher, who taught us our alphabet and the Torah, and we learned the Rashi, who was a medieval commentaries too. The cheder was a separate place next to the so-called little synagogue, and only boys went. We went to the Melamed when we were 3 years old. At first, we learned to read, but we didn't know what the words meant. Then we started learning the Torah. We translated it into Yiddish. I met with Yiddish for the first time in cheder. We didn't speak Yiddish at home. We spoke Hungarian. Families usually spoke Hungarian, but if a problem connected with religion came up, they talked about it in Yiddish, especially those who would study more. They would even write letters in Yiddish. I could do that. So the kids didn't really understand the language that the Melamed taught, only if he also explained it in Hungarian, which is very interesting because language is often an indicator of identity. In the cheder, you could not study because it was strict. It was quiet during the lessons, and the way he presented the lesson was interesting. Even little 3-year-old kids couldn't stand up or talk. They had to have control, and they did. It was such a natural thing that we were happy to do it. Everybody could hardly wait to get there before they were 3 years old. That's the sort of reputation that cheder had, and that you had to study. It's everybody's responsibility. And kids were happy to go there because he sang the Torah, especially musically. I was really interested in what we studied, and I learned it well. By the way, he's talking about boys only. You had to go to cheder until you were about 12 because the preparations for the bar mitzvah happened at the cheder, and that's where we learned the drosh that we had to present. The bar mitzvah wasn't in the synagogue, it was at home. In the synagogue, the bar mitzvah was called up to the Torah for the first time. First, we'd finish our fairs in the synagogue, and that would take until noon. Then there was lunch where the family was, and afterward came the guests. We'd set up tents. We had a tent in the yard, too, where the guests would come. Almost the entire community was there. There were 3 long tables. I stood at the head of the table and very proudly said my drosha, which is basically his reflection on the part of the Torah, the Bible, that he read in the ceremony. Then the bar mitzvah got his new clothing, which was finally long pants and things like that. But gift giving wasn't in fashion. There was a movie theater in Kishkarosh where we didn't really go because movies weren't for Jewish kids. My parents didn't forbid it. It just was normal that it wasn't entertainment for us. Somehow that's how they raised us. There was a movie theater in the Sarvash building where every sort of cultural event would happen. They had gypsy music evenings there. There was a restaurant in the Sarvash there's a restaurant in Sarvash and a hotel too, and shops. The last shop was my father's leather goods shops. Then there was a house with a stage, and they would hold theater performances just with Jews. They would rent the place and learn the play they wanted to present ahead of time, then put it on. Afterwards, there was music, and then the young people would dance with each other. There were Yiddish plays, but presented in Hungarian. So that's one Jewish experience growing up. Any questions? Anyone have anything they want to add or say before I go on? So I threw this in as an example because, as I said, of a woman who was in Ukraine. I can't remember where in Ukraine she grew up at. It's somewhere in Ukraine. And this is her description of what it was like during the Great Famine under Stalin. Also pre-war, right? We're talking, I think the famine was, I want to say 32 to 33. In the first row from right to left are my mother, Esther Grinberg, my son, Izya Gershman, and my brother, Avram Grinberg. Standing are my first husband, Shunya Gershman, and me. The photo was taken in 1936 in Berdichev. How Shunya and I came together has to do with the Holodomor, the Great Famine, 32 and 33. Our enormous family gathered every night after synagogue in our dining room, and nearly 24 of us sat around the table for those wonderful dinners. Then came the famine of 1932. Food became scarce, it disappeared, and I began to see dead people just lying on the streets. Just then, my mother's friend's son, Shunya Gershman, arrived from Moscow. When he saw that we were starving, he cried, "Let Sonia come with me, otherwise she'll die here." Mother refused, but Shunya kept coming back and begging her, although I was completely unaware of it. On his last day, Mother blurted out, "You want to take her with you? Then marry her." He instantly agreed. I came home from school and was horrified to learn this. I mean, I was 16 and Shunya was an old man of 21. We were married by our rabbi. I sobbed and we left for Moscow the following morning by train. When Shunya told his mother, she was aghast, but quickly understood he had actually saved me. She tried to make me feel at home, and she absolutely did not let Shunya sleep in my bedroom. After 8 weeks, Shunya's uncle Gedalia came on a visit from Odessa. He asked me why I looked so sad. I told him and he immediately made plans to take me home. He telegraphed my mother, and the next morning we went to the train station. Shunya came running, begging me to stay, but I wouldn't hear of it. When I reached Berdichev, it was clear my mother was practically a walking skeleton and my younger sister had starved to death. Still, I was happy to be home and I walked the streets of my beloved Berdichev. In 1941, Shunya returned to Berdichev, and this time he and Sarah became husband and wife. They had a son, Sarah and the baby fled to Central Asia when the Germans took Berdichev, and Shunya went to the front as a soldier where he was killed. Almost all of her family were murdered in the Berdichev ghetto. And she married another man, Zelik Kaplan, in 44, and they started their own family, set up a barbershop in Lviv, and remained there till he died. And she passed away in 2007. So I really wanted to show you, and this is another example of pre-war Jewish life. So when you say pre-war Jewish life to your students, what are we talking about? Even though I do understand there's limited time, I get that. But I'm hoping to offer you a lot of resources, and you can choose the ones that you'll be able to use. So I want to just show you another one. I'm not going to do this for the entire time, I promise. I'm going to go to Western Europe next, so you can see a little bit about the difference in culture. Let me see, how are we doing on time? What time are we ending?
We're ending at, well, 5:45, we were going to leave about 15 minutes for questions, but we're going to end it.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so
Okay.
I have like 20 minutes. Okay. Okay.
We can go a little, we just have to end by 6, so.
Yeah, okay. I don't know, I think to me, this is the best way to show you the diversity. That's why I'm doing this way. In the specificity of these stories, they just do much better than anything I could do in an hour talking about the big history. So Rosa Kamki is from Bitola, with the former Yugoslavia, now it's in North Macedonia. A completely different culture, right? We're talking about Sephardic Jews whose families were originally from Spain, as opposed to Ashkenazi Jews. It's a whole nother topic. But Ashkenazi Jews are people whose families were really from Northern Europe. And they have different cultural traditions. They basically follow the same Jewish law with a few slight differences. But basically, they have a lot of different cultural traditions because the Jews from Spain, when they were expelled from Spain, many of them went to the Balkans here, many went to North Africa, many went to the Middle East, some went to South America, some went to Holland and England. And this woman and her family are descendants of those who ultimately ended up in the Ottoman Empire, that part of the Ottoman Empire, which are the Balkans. So she's talking about being part of a Zionist youth group. I was a member of Hashomer Hatzair from the age of 14. We'd gather in our Ken, which means chapter, every day, and we were very progressive for that time. Every day they gave us lectures about hygiene, world events, the political situation. The Ken had its own building and is still there in Bitola. Inside there was a kindergarten, a big hall, a yard. In Hashomer Hatzair, we wore everyday clothes except when there was a special occasion. The first time I was on a train, when I went to a Moshav, which is a scouting camp, this was when all of the chapters in former Yugoslavia came together. Every city had a chapter, and they made Moshavot, these camping grounds from the whole of Yugoslavia. The Macedonians had one tent, those from King Vinkovci had one, and those from Belgrade had one. We cleaned, prepared the food, learned Hebrew songs, made campfires, told stories. I think that it lasted for 15 days. Each year was in a different city. One time it was here in Macedonia, in Prespa. Every year in a new place. We never went to the same place 2 years in a row. That was nice because we all met. This was the first time I was out of Bitola. This was the first time that, meaning this is this photo here, the first time that I bathed in a river. I'm very pleased with the way I spent my young life in this chapter. It was progressive. We exchanged all progressive books. Almost every Saturday evening we would get together. We put on plays for ourselves. This helped make me a progressive social group for myself. And Rosa Kamki and her group in Bitola ultimately became partisans, fighting against the Nazis in the former Yugoslavia. So those are just 3 examples from Central Europe. I threw in this one from a little bit, excuse me, I was saying Eastern Europe. I threw in this woman's story here so that you could get a sense of how the Zionist youth groups were so important to so many Jews. And this is true of Jews in Western Europe as well. But it's very hard to kind of convey the centrality, but I think even reading this excerpt for me, I feel like anyone who's in a church youth group could get a sense of, oh yeah, I do this with my church youth group, or I do this with my people. So that's how I think of this. I don't know if you do, but that's how I think of this. So the next thing I want to do, I came back here to show you, we're going to talk about Western Europe a little bit more now. And now the resources Centropa has are only from the 15 countries where we did interviews. And that's Central Europe, like here, it was Greece and includes Greece and Turkey, and also the Baltics and Russia, right? So this, but we don't have from Italy, we don't have from France or Belgium or Great Britain or Holland or any of these northern countries at all. So when I talk about Central Europe, or the western part of Central Europe, for Centropa's resources, that's going to be mostly Germany, some Austria, Czechoslovakia at the time, etc. And so the Eastern Europe, the Western European Jews, they tended to be fewer Jews. They tended to live more in towns and cities than in these small shtetl towns tended to be. They tended to be less traditionally religious because they lived in urban environments. They were exposed to more Enlightenment ideas, more progressive modern ideas. Remember, we're talking about Industrial Revolution, like post-industrial revolution in the early Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century, early 20th century. All of these things are having an impact on the Jewish communities here as well. And I chose these two photos. I love them. This is from an interview in Germany, Rosa Rosenstein. This is her and her friends and her sisters on the beach. And the reason I chose this is because traditionally religious girls would not be in bathing suits on the beach with, I don't know if there are any boys in this picture. Yeah, there are boys in this picture. That just wouldn't happen. And this is also true here, although this is from a Poland interview. They tended to have more secular educations, more influence from the Enlightenment. They adopted the larger culture in dress and language. So for example, a great example is the Reform movement. If anyone knows anything about the Reform movement, Reform Judaism in the United States, many Jews in the United States are Reform Jews. And it basically is a modern form of Judaism that started in Germany. It was created in Germany, it started in the early 1800s and quickly evolved, and the whole goal was to modernize Judaism. And so they didn't want to look like they were in the shtetl. They wanted to burst out of the shtetl. They wanted to be part of the modern world. They wanted to be emancipated. They wanted to be accepted by the larger culture. This was the impetus of Jews, particularly in Western Europe. And Reform Judaism was designed to look like Protestant churches, like the synagogues they made were designed to look like Protestant churches. And they shaped some of the services after Protestant services, and some of the rituals that way, because their idea was, we're going to show Germans that we're just like them. We just worship God slightly differently than they do, but we're just like them. And then they'll see that we're really no different. They don't have to be afraid of us, and they won't discriminate against us and persecute us anymore. I mean, that was again, I'm drawing broad brushstrokes, but that was basically the impetus. Okay, so I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts from Western European interviews. This is Hillel Kempler from Berlin. He said, "We were a real Berlin family. We often drove around. We're always out and about. My father would come too, since his pastry shop was closed on Saturdays. On Sundays, we drive down to Wannsee or Grunewald, forest, or the lake. We'd go to Alexanderplatz, which was really close by. There were always markets on Alexanderplatz and often circuses. I still remember a Zeppelin that landed in Berlin. We were there for that. The whole city was there. The Babylon Cinema was located near Grenadierstrasse on Rosa-Luxemburg-Platz, across from the Volksbühne, which is a Berlin theater. I often went there to the Babylon to see comedies. They were still silent. In winter, I would ice skate on the square in front of the Volksbühne with other kids, and we had good relationships with the Gentiles. It didn't matter if someone was Jewish or not, you were accepted. I never heard Jew associated with anything negative from the people on our street. If Hitler hadn't come, we definitely would have stayed in Berlin." I specifically chose this because he said he went to the movies, and Joseph Baludi said no, Jews didn't go to movies where he lived, right? I really wanted to show that contrast here. This woman, Lucia Haumann, oh my goodness, her story is so interesting. Her mother was married, and then she says that the husband cheated on the mother, and they eventually divorced, but the mother ended up like living with the boyfriend. How did it work? Let's see. Then she had, then the mother, Lucia's mother, had Lucia with her father, Rudolf Kraus, but she wasn't married to Rudolf Kraus. And then her mother and Lucia lived with her, Lucia's grandfather and the mother's boyfriend. So there was a lot of, this was just, I think, a very unusual family story. But I wanted to show another aspect of what it was like for some more Western European Jews. So this woman's from Vienna, Austria. She said, my father, Rudolf Kraus, visited us every week, and he really cared about me. He played with me for the couple of hours he was with me in our apartment. He always came on my birthday and brought me very lovely presents. My father's mother lived in the 2nd district on Engertstrasse. She was a sewing teacher. My mother and I were rarely at her place. We were there on Easter and Christmas. Once on Easter, I received a white egg made of sugar that you could look inside. At Christmas, there was a Christmas tree and good food. My mother worked at the Lines Hospital. In those days, you had to work Saturdays, so my mother was only home on Sundays, plus 14 vacation days a year. She worked a lot in a career with a lot of responsibility. When she came home, she still had to buy and cook everything. But my mother had a lot of energy. Her friends came to visit every evening and she would make tea. Her friends usually brought something to eat since she couldn't offer anything because we were too poor. They ate together and chatted. She had Jewish and non-Jewish friends, and no one ever talked about that one being a Jewish friend and that one a Christian friend. The door was open to everyone. My mother was exceptionally social, vivacious, and friendly. Even the men liked her. My grandfather would look after me all day. He spoke Yiddish, so I remember Yiddish well. We went for walks in the Danube Canal. He read books aloud to me. I loved it when he told me stories. Each time he asked, should I tell you about heaven or hell? I always wanted him to talk about hell. He also sang from operettas. My grandfather was a religious man and regularly went to synagogue and often brought me with him. From time to time, we visited my uncle Arnold, the pharmacist, and his family. They were very well off. His wife's name was Cecilia, and they had a daughter, Renata, who was 3 years younger than me. Renata had nice toys, such as a doll carriage and lots of things I didn't have. Naturally, I was very jealous. So any comments or questions about the diversity or these different pieces? Are these extra things you think you might be able to use in your classes? Are they doing what I hope they're doing, which is drawing a picture of Jewish life for you? Yeah, okay, I'm seeing a few nods. I can't see that many. I'm seeing a few, so I'm hoping it's working. It's really my goal. I'm not here to just take up your time. So I wanted to show you, I'm going to show you this film called My Town of Zamość. It's a 7-minute film, and I downloaded it because I always do. Actually, you know what? I'm going to show you the shorter film because I want to take time to show you the resources I have for you. So can you see this black box? Yeah, okay, great. So this is a 4-minute film, and you can, I really always want to show a film because you can get a sense of what our films are like. It's one of our personal story films. We do have what we call our MAPS film. It's about the changing borders of Central and Eastern Europe from the partitions of Poland through the first decade, through the fall of Yugoslavia, excuse me. And then that's a 7-minute film. So that's a really our most popular documentary probably. But this one, I just wanted to show you as an example. I call them our Centropa classics because when Centropa first started, our goal was really to focus on pre-war Jewish life. But as we started working with public school teachers, we realized we really need to find, we wanted you to be able to use our resources in the context in which you teach them. Most people teach them, which is Holocaust. So our films started getting longer, 15-minute stories, because we would insert more about the Holocaust experience or maps or timelines. So this is just this is not the one I want to show you. Sorry, I opened the wrong one. This is just a little bit over 4 minutes, almost 5 minutes, and it'll give you a little taste of what our films are like. Let me just turn it down a teeny bit.
Tak tohle jsem já se svojí rodinou na fotografii pořízené roku 1927. Byli jsme silně věřící, chasidé. Můj otec vlastnil malý obchůdek, který provozoval v našem domě. Prodávali v něm všechno možné. Žili jsme v Mukačevu, jak městu říkali Češi, či Munkáči, jak bylo zváno maďarsky. Naše město totiž během 70 let náleželo 5 různým státům. Ovšem v době, kdy jsem vyrůstal, bylo Mukačevo v první řadě židovské. V ulicích jste slýchali jidiš a maďarštinu
Egy fagylaltot kérek.
a češtinu a hebrejštinu. Když jsem byl děcko, každý můj den začínal v cheder, tedy v škole pro zbožné chlapce, už v 6:30 ráno. Zde jsme se modlili a učili do 8:30. Poté, co jsme v chederu skončili, vydali jsme se do naší české školy, kde jsme se nezřídka učili pravý opak toho, co jsme poslouchali ráno. Tady jsem já v mé české třídě, sedím úplně vpravo ve spodní řadě. Toto byl náš rabín, rabí Chaim Spira. Byl jedním z nejvýznamnějších chasidů a lidé přicházeli ze všech možných koutů, jen aby si poslechli jeho kázání. Zde už je ovšem rabín z Belzu, jak vychází ze své synagogy. Přívrženci těchto dvou rabínů se čas od času poprali. Dnes už je to těžko představitelné, ale věřte mi, že tak to tehdy chodilo. Rabí Spira zemřel v roce 1937. Celé město se tehdy ponořilo do smutku. Dokonce i naši nežidovští sousedé oblékli černé šaty a všude byl slyšet velký nářek. Za války byl můj otec spolu s maminkou deportován do Osvětimi, kde v plynové komoře oba zahynuli. Mým sestrám se však podařilo válku přežít. A co se mě týče, já jsem byl poslán do tábora nucených prací, kde jediná věc, která mě držela při životě a pomohla mi přežít, byly vzpomínky na moji přítelkyni Tildu. Toto jsme my dva v roce 1943. Když jsem byl na nucených pracích, vtírala se mi na mysl jediná otázka. Vrátí se Tilda s Osvětimi? Tilda se skutečně vrátila a v roce 1946 jsme se vzali. Měli jsme malou civilní svatbu, jelikož po tom všem, co se stalo, jsme náboženské zvyky opustili. Naše dva syny jsme vychovávali k povědomí o judaismu, ale pak přišel život v Sovětském svazu a ten s náboženstvím nešel dohromady. Později, v roce 1991, se ovšem všechno změnilo. Dnes pomáhám při bohoslužbách u nás v synagoze. Můj vnuk žije v Izraeli a můj syn je zaměstnán na židovské obci. A s Tildou jsme navštívili Izrael. Poprvé v životě. Za svůj život jsem poznal, že všechno prochází změnami. A tak, i když je mi 80 let, dopisuji si se svým vnukem přes e-mail. Internetový fanatik se ze mě ale už pravděpodobně nestane.
So that's an example. That's just a quick example of one of our films, obviously one of our shorter films. Most of our films these days, as I said, are 15, 18 minutes long. Let me just see.
Dr. Granite, somebody in the chat asked, which film did you say was your most popular one?
Oh, yes. It's called, well, the one I was talking about is called Maps. Oops, I'll just put it in the chat. Maps, Central Europe and History. And that's one of our most popular documentaries. There are a bunch of other ones. Survival in Sarajevo is a great film, 12-minute film, but it's about the Bosnian War. The synagogue opened up, the Jews in Sarajevo opened up their synagogue, Bosnian War, the 1990s. The Jews in Sarajevo opened up their synagogue to Bosniaks, for Bosnian Muslims, Catholic Croats and Orthodox Christian Serbs, and they all work together to save each other during the war. It's a really wonderful film, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I want to show you, I was going to read you one more thing, but we don't have time. I wanted to just point out that we obviously, because we got the whole story, the excerpts I showed you were before the Nazis came through, but we have plenty of excerpts, if this is something you're looking for in teaching your class, of what it was like when students started going, the Nazis like came into Vienna. We have a lot of interviews from Vienna. It's one of the places where we did the most interviews. And so a lot of stories from Austria where, you know, suddenly their teacher or their teacher was a Nazi and turned against them or didn't like them or whatever happened, or someone helped them, or what happened on Kristallnacht, etc. So there are plenty of stories like that that we have in our excerpts, in our interviews as well, but I'm not going to go through that. What I do want to show you, however, is I want to show you, can you see that? Am I still sharing? Yes, I am, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to show you, oh, hold on a second. I want to give you in the chat of the link. I created a Google Classroom. Now I'm going to put it in the chat, and you all have you probably will need a private Google account to, oops, that's not what I wanted, a private Google account to access this. In our experience, even if you have a Google account through your school district, it often won't let you into this, but you're more than welcome to join this classroom. And I think that link should do it. If you try and it doesn't work, let me know. I'll recopy it and put it here. But I want to show you the two activities I put together that I'm hoping that, you know, specifically for teachers. And if we were doing this in person, I would have done one of these activities with you. It just was too hard to do this one, especially. So I've done two activities that help hopefully help you teach your students something about the diversity of Jewish life pre-war using photographs. And the best way I think to show you this is I created a teacher packet. So in this activity, it's a gallery walk. And the idea is that in the gallery walk, you would post around the room two photos together. So these two photos together with the QR codes, right? And then the next two together would be this two, and the next two, and there are 12 pairs of them. So there's a total of 24 photos in pairs, and you post them around the room in pairs. And this teacher packet has for you the list of the pairs, and each one is labeled A, or each item is either an A photo or a B photo, just to keep them straight. Otherwise, you would never be able to figure it out. The hyperlinks will take you to those interviewees for which we have short films, in case you're interested. And in this teacher packet, I put the description of the photo that I showed you on the website that every photo has. I've included the description for the two photos here, so you do not have to go look for them. If you're sending your students to look for them, you just print out this packet or have it on your whatever, wherever you read your stuff, and it's all there for you, so you don't have to go look for it. So the idea is you put them around, and hold on. Oh yeah, this is a document that has everything so that you can quickly print out the QR codes, and this if you want. I have high resolution versions of the photographs only down here, you know, number 1, number 2, 1A, 1B, etc. High resolution will print better. And then what I did was, hold on, I know I have a, oh, here, it's a student worksheet. Okay, so I created a student worksheet and I've uploaded it in PDF and Word in case you want to change some of it. So your first goal would be to have students walk and just look at all the photos. I've really been convinced that having students just take time to look at photos before they read anything about it really helps their ability to observe. And the first thing they're supposed to do is just write what they see, but not what they think they see, but what they actually see. So the photo of those young people on the beach, you could say, I see a photo of 6 people on the beach in their bathing suits. It's very specific and concrete. Then, and they go around and they just can jot down whatever it is they see. And part of what we're trying to do is get them to distinguish between what's actually there, what everyone can agree on, and their interpretation of what's there, right? So it could be they say, these are all friends, but they're actually all sisters and brothers. They don't know yet, but we want to get them to think critically about how they're assessing things, because there's a whole fact-truth problem happening in our world. Okay, based on the photos, what words would you use to describe Jewish life? So you're trying to get them to sort of engage with all of the photos at once. And then each student picks one pair of photos. And for each photograph, they answer these questions. This is what I noticed. These are my questions. This is what I think is happening. And then they read the information about the photograph and answer these questions. And they do the same thing for the second photo in their pair. And then they meet up with one or two other people, and they can go and they can stand in front of each of the photographs as each person, forks over the information. It's kind of like a jigsaw, right? And then together they answer these three questions, and then you can do whatever you want with them as a group. I've also, I've also created other activities that you might, a PDF here with some other suggested activities. So for example, you could do an extension activity where you could say, pick one of these people who you looked at in the photo and go on the Centropa website using the QR code. Just scroll down, you'll see all the rest of the photos from that interview, and find a photograph from that person later in their life and find out what happened to them. Something like this. So this is just random ideas I had. So any questions about that? No? Okay. Hopefully, I think everything's there for you, but if there's something not there for you, you can't access it, please do let me know. That's what I do. This I created during COVID. This was I created a montage. I call it a montage. I don't know if that's the technical word, where it's very similar, but it's a different format, which is these are 12 photos from different countries. And one of the things I tried to do in the gallery walk one is really pair up photos from people from different countries to highlight the diversity of Jewish life. And that's hopefully what they're going to discover as they delve in. So these are from different countries, and a lot of them are from Poland, but and each one is hyperlinked. So you could start by having a discussion about what a student see here, and then put them into breakout groups. And each student picks a different photo. You can either assign it or whatever. And if they click on this, it'll take them to the page on the website. God willing, sometimes you never know. It's supposed to. I'm pretty sure it will. So here you go. This is one of my, this might be my favorite photo, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see the whole thing. And I love this photo because when you ask students what do they see, they usually say things like, oh, someone's dancing. And I said, you don't know if she's dancing. Again, you really want to push them to be really clear about what can we all agree on. We can all agree she has a bow in her hair. We can all agree she's pointing a toe. We can all agree on this. And then down here you find out she's actually showing off her fancy new sandals. Okay, so anyway, you put them in groups, and then I also similarly have a student worksheet where students, first they look at the photograph and come up with 3 questions about the photograph before they read anything. Then they find out the survivor's name and where the person was from. Then by reading the text, and they list 3 things they learned. Then they share what they learned in their little group, right? But the thing is, here, they don't list anything from their person or their photograph. They basically have to list something from the person who talked before them. They have to listen carefully about what the person before them learned from their photograph and little interview excerpt. And they have to do that. And so it creates a sense of responsibility from the person who has to say something that someone else can write some things down about, and you have to listen carefully. And then after they've gone around and everyone does that, they all answer analysis questions, and then they go back to their photograph that they each looked at individually, and they say, well, now that I've heard all these other questions, what question, all these other stories, do I have other questions about my first photograph that I looked at over here? So again, I've uploaded the worksheet in Word and PDF in case you wanted to change anything. Here's instructions. Here's the teacher packet with all of the information so that you don't have to download everything yourself. So every photo's description is under the photo. I don't have the QR codes here because I did it before we had QR codes, but I do have the link for you to go directly to. And I have a variety of different activity and lesson ideas using this photo montage, or research projects you could do that delve more into it. So I hope I hope you'll use this, download it. If you have any comments, questions, I love feedback. If you use it, I would be so grateful for just a little blurb about how it worked, because this is how we stay funded. Anything, I'm happy to answer questions. I would like to say, Shauna, before I end, I think this is everything, but I do want to talk a little bit about a couple of our programs coming up. Should I do that now or wait till after the questions?
No, I think now would be a good time. And if anyone has a question, they can write it in the chat.
Okay.
But now's a good time to talk about.
Okay, great. So I'm going to put in the chat. We have a couple of programs that I'd love to let you know about. One, this is a program I'm super proud about. Oops, hold on. I have to cut and paste. Try to do that and talk at the same time. We are probably, and I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everyone. So one of the things we did was we did a lot of interviews in Vienna and Budapest, and we didn't want to say goodbye to our interviewees, these elderly Holocaust survivors in the 2000s. And so we started Cafe Centropa, where they get together once every 6 weeks or so, and they just have a meal together. They bring in a comedian, they bring in an entertainer, they have a Passover Seder, they celebrate Jewish holidays together, both in Budapest and here. Anyway, during COVID, I was like, what do teachers need? What can we offer teachers that Centropa is really good at? And one of the things we're really good at is connecting teachers. We have an international teachers network with teachers from Israel, Europe, and the US, as I mentioned earlier. And every summer we bring teachers to the great cities of Central Europe. So I started Cafe Centropa Teachers Edition, and we meet about once every 6 weeks. We alternate Saturdays and Sundays because people go to church or synagogue. And we're spanning, I think, 10 hours from California to Israel. So the Californians get up at 8 a.m. and the Israelis are there like 6 p.m. And basically we do 15 minutes of either a general discussion. Sometimes like in February or March, we talked about what's happening what are you talking to about with your kids about Ukraine? And we have teachers from North Macedonia, and we sometimes have Ukrainian teachers there, or we might have a presentation of someone who has something that would be interesting to our teachers. But the main point of Cafe Centropa is you then have 2 sessions in breakout groups randomly selected by Zoom, where you just get to sit and talk to people from other countries, US teachers too, but you're randomly put in these groups and you have 30 minutes and you just hang out, talk about whatever it is you want. And then we get back together and then I put you in the group again. So our next one is December 11th at 11 a.m. Eastern time, and we hope you'll join us. We'd love to have you. And it's really, I will say, if you're teaching about the Holocaust, to talk to people who teach about the Holocaust in Poland or Hungary or Austria or wherever the Holocaust took place, it changes your perspective, because all of us have our own national narratives and we don't all teach it in the exact same way. And it's it can really deepen your perspective of what you want to bring to your students. And also it's just kind of cool to talk to teachers who are in different countries. Okay. The other thing I wanted to show you was the Milton Wolf Prize. I'm gonna have to share my screen again, sorry about that. But do it really quickly. For students grades 6 to 12, why is this a bit? I'm gonna zoom out. Okay, anyway, for students grades 6 to 12, we have this civics project. This is Milton Wolf. He was the US ambassador to Vienna in the 70s. And during the siege of Sarajevo, he helped Zainab Bahardaga, who's a righteous Gentile. She saved her Jewish neighbor during the Holocaust and her family get out of Sarajevo and safely to Israel. And his daughter funds a project. We're still waiting to if we're going to get funding this year, but I think we will, for grades 6 to 12 public school students. And they identify a community problem, research the problem. It can be racism, it can be environmental things like garbage and trash. We get a lot of garbage and trash projects. It can be animal abuse, it can be drugs, homelessness. Also, we've gotten everything, human trafficking. But they research the topic. They find organizations, particularly local organizations in your community, that are helping to address the problem. They create a presentation. It can be a Prezi, it can be a website, it can be a video. And then they use that presentation to advocate for others to get involved in that cause that they're passionate about. And then they send us the presentation, and they have to show us proof of presenting. And there's cash prizes. And you can look at all the facts here about, we have cash prizes for them. And I will tell you this, though, students really, let me just see here. Here it is. Students really love this project because they just find something they're passionate about, and it's real life skills. And they're terrified to present, but they're so happy when they did. And they're like, yes, I really helped change people's minds about this topic. And what we've done with the website is we've made it very clear cut what to do. Every single one of these steps, these 5 steps, has a page like this. The basic key question, the goal for the student. If they're having trouble figuring out how to do it, there's a little blog here. I wrote a very quick blog about giving them a suggestion, depending on which one of these it is. Here's suggestions from previous topics, and here's a checklist. So we hope you'll consider entering your students in this, and it doesn't have to be a class assignment. It can be just students do often submit group projects for this. Also, sometimes independently, those self-directed students want to do it. Oh, I forgot the most important thing, which is the Summer Academy. One more thing, and then I'll stop talking. We have every year, as I mentioned, we bring teachers to the great cities of Central Europe. So let me just see this, CSA, there we go. And next year, we're going to be going to Vienna and Prague and Terezin, July 4th to 12th. We're just now getting around to nailing down the program, but this first page here, and I'll put it in the chat, will give you a little bit of an overview. We do have some scholarships from people from the Metro West area of New Jersey, to help pay for this. And you can look at the program here. We moved it around quite a bit the other day, and we haven't had time to put it up on the website, but it's really a remarkable experience. We bring 70 teachers from about 17 or 18 countries, and this will be an 8-day program. You'll meet experts, you'll learn the Jewish history, you'll learn the Holocaust history. We'll talk a little bit about the Cold War in Terezin. We'll talk about Ukraine, and this past year in Berlin, we had 6 teachers from Ukraine who talked about what was happening there, if that's something you're interested in. And so if you have any questions about any of this stuff, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and then I think I'm done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Granite. There's so much information here. The summer trip looks incredible. Someone asked, just as an aside, if you could just give a quick explanation about the young Jewish women in Eastern Europe, where they got their education. And I think I know the answer, but if you could just give us a brief little explanation.
Well, the very Orthodox had a group, I don't know what it's called. They had these schools called Beis Yaakov schools. They were very, very traditionally religious schools, and traditionally Jewish women weren't allowed to study Talmud. They weren't allowed, and they had like sort of shortened, like, I don't know how to say this, stories from the Bible as opposed to really reading the Torah. They weren't allowed to read the Torah in synagogue as part of the rituals or anything like that. So they had these Beis Yaakov schools which were often focused on like morals and ethics and things like this. But so that was the very religious, but as you saw, depending on where you live, the girls would get more or less of an education. Did you want to add anything to that, Shana?
No, I just know that my own bubby, my own great grandma said that only the boys went to school and she stayed home and did the work. That's what she always said.
That was in tradition.
That's one experience. I know.
No, but in traditional communities, that absolutely was the case until this woman, Sarah Schneerer, came along and created these Beis Yaakov schools. But it was still different, like they still didn't have access to the same kind of education that the boys did.
Right. Thank you so much. If there are any other questions, please feel free to unmute yourself, and now would be the time you can speak up. If not, you can always ask your professor, you can ask Mary or Jamie or me, and we can get the question to Dr. Granite. We'll also provide all the links tonight again for you on our Google Classrooms. I know a few people were asking about the links to the cafe, the summer trip, and to the Google Classroom as well.
Great, thank you.
Are there any questions?
I'll follow up too. And, seriously, I do understand that you're not going to go into a ton of detail about Jewish life before them. Most of you are not going to have that. Well, to me, it would be a luxury. I don't know what it would be to you, maybe torture. I have no idea. But so if there's any way I can help you bridge that gap in a way that works for you, that's what I love doing. That's what I'm here to do. And I really hope you'll reach out to me. I'm happy to help you do that for the students you need in whatever course you're teaching.
Is there anybody who has a question right now for Dr. Granite? People are saying just thank you. What great resources, so much good information.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mary and Jamie, do you want to give a quick announcement to your students? And I'll give one as well before we say goodnight. But thank you so much. Everybody's saying thank you so much. What great information. So thank you so much, Dr. Granite. I'm so glad you could be with us tonight, and we will be sure to pass along everything that you shared with us. And thanks again. So quick, I'm just going to stop the recording here.